Good evening. Gosh, I feel like it's been ages since I've had this Mass. I'm treating you guys like you're the 8 a.m. And even the last time I had the Mass, Father Michael preached. Yeah, gosh, you've been listening to Father Michael preach at you for like 4 or 5 weeks. The Lord is my shepherd. Right? Okay. So today is the feast day of Christ the King. St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a Dominican brilliant genius who basically wrote all there is to know about the church, the Summa Theologica. He also wrote some other stuff. But he talks about government, and he says that the ideal form of government is a benevolent king, right? A monarch, which is what we had for a long time. And sometimes they were benevolent. Sometimes they were even made saints. Other times they weren't. But there was this understanding that the monarchy, where one person that kind of has the best intention for everybody around, was the way to do it. Of course, human corruption makes it so that that is not really as perfect as it could be. But if there were one who were striving to live a holy life and were striving to be virtuous, and that one were made king, and he ruled over the land, then probably things would go really well, and people would be content and happy, and they would be provided for. Sometimes in history that's been seen. Sometimes in history it's been seen where that didn't work at all, especially when you enter in with like other ideologies and things. But we celebrate today the feast day of Christ the King because we do have a king, and he is a benevolent king. He is a good king. He is a loving king. He is a king that wants the best for us. He is a king that gives each of us our little duties that we have. Watching Downton Abbey, it's interesting to see kind of the way that the royalty worked, and yeah, I guess you see it getting kind of upset, but you got the king, and you got the dukes, and you got the earls, and you got all the way down to the people that live on the manor and, take care of the pigs, but they've got a place where they fit, and they know what they need to do, and they're well taken care of. Now, within the church, the kingdom of God here on earth, all of us have a place, all of us have a role, all of us have something that we are required to do, that God calls us to, and he calls us to do it well, to the best of our ability, right? Last week, the parable of the talents, right? One guy was given 10, or rather he was given 5, and he doubled them to 10. One was given 2, he doubled them to 4, and the one guy was given 1. The master expected him to at least be able to do something with that 1, to his ability. He didn't do it, so he got cast out. But God calls each and every one of us to do our part in his kingdom to our ability. And he knows what that is. He knows what we are capable of. He knows the degree to which we can be holy. And so how do we do that? By striving to make a priority in our life doing his will. Doing his will in all aspects of our life. By making him really, truly Lord and King of our lives. If somebody asks us, what kingdom do you belong to? We're probably going to say, well, it's not a kingdom, it's America. It's a democratic republic, and it's the best form of government ever, right? Or are we going to say, well, I belong to Christ, right? Back when Kennedy was elected president, the big fear was people were going to be loyal to the Pope before they were loyal to the president, right? And they thought, well, that's bad, right? That's dangerous. Well, shouldn't we be loyal to the church? Shouldn't we be loyal to Christ before anything else? We should, yeah. I mean, we should say, well, how does my living in society in the United States of America and acting as in a civic manner, how does my faith influence that? How does my relationship with God influence that? I hope a great deal, right? I hope a very great deal. That when we're called on to make decisions or when we're called on to give our input, which is called voting, that we reflect and we meditate on what it means to be faithful and what it means to strive to do the will of God, not what it means to get what I want. But so often we live in that world of instant gratification where we can get what we want, right? By the way, the master plan is almost complete, and I had this thought earlier today that, well, what if the Archbishop just says, I'll just let you build the road, and I'm going to give you free money, I'm going to give you a loan to build the road. Yeah, there's no such thing, exactly, right? And great, because it's dangerous, and we'd have the road, and then we'd have this road, and we'd have even more debt. And I thought, no, if he offers to give us free money, I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to say no, because then we're not going to have anything to work for. We're going to have that instant gratification, right? And we live in a world of instant gratification. You can change the channel on the TV. You can change the channel in the car. You can get online and listen to music, whatever music you want. You can do it from your phone. When I was a kid, you had to make sure mom wasn't on the phone, and you had to listen to the dial-up modem go, and you had to go on Napster and download it, but you had to do it overnight because it took forever. Kids today, spoiled, right? And then some of you had to go and get the record, right? Yeah. Oh, my sister was the queen of mixtapes. She made me all sorts of 80s and 90s music, grunge mixtapes that I probably shouldn't have listened to when I was 5 years old. But anyway, she knew how to hit record and stop perfect time. All right, getting a little distracted. But we live in a world of instant gratification whereby we just say, there's this thing I want and I'm going to get it, right? But yet, our Lord, our King, he says, there's this thing that I want you to have, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get it. It's called membership in the kingdom of heaven. It's called being a co-heir with me in heaven. But first you have to live here on earth. First, you have to strive to be holy. First, you have to strive to do my will. First, you have to make me the king of your life. If we think about it, there's probably all sorts of decisions throughout our day where we can say, yeah, I'm going to do this because it's going to make me happy right now, but it's going to hurt my relationship with God. Or we can say, even though there's this thing that maybe isn't even an evil, maybe it's morally neutral, but if I do it, it's going to distract me from God. It's going to push me away from God. Help me to always choose the thing that allows God to be the king of my life. Pope Pius XI is the one that established this feast day back in the 30s or 40s. It was kind of in response to communism and Nazis and global messes and just everything, and people getting confused as to what it meant to do the will of God. And so Pope Pius reminds the church, that we have one king and one alone, and it is Jesus Christ. And we're called to do all that we can for him. So here we are at Mass, offering the best that we have to offer to God, which is something that we do at every Mass, but then in a little bit more of a full way for this feast day, we say, we're highlighting the fact that we have a king. Let us treat him like a king. So I wear the gold. It's gold and red. It's not crimson. Someone told me I look like a Seminoles thing. And I said, no, I don't. If I did, I'd have a TV in my arm running away. They're criminals, the Seminoles. Anyway, sorry. Like I said, it's been a little while. I saved all this stuff up for you guys. Judith's is going to give me a talking to after Mass. Yeah. But we present the very best that we have to God, which maybe I'm not doing in my poor attempt at humor. But we present the very best that we have so that God may be worshipped well, right? So that God may be worshipped well. For the last several weeks, we've been hearing about knowing, loving, serving God, doing his will, by striving to elevate just a little bit. If what we do at Mass today is better than what we did at Mass a week ago, if we were able to enter in and pay more attention to the prayers a little bit better this week than we did last week, wonderful. Wonderful. We're striving to give Christ primacy of place in our lives. If we recognize that there are other kings in this world that desire our allegiance, that desire us to do their will, we say, no, I'm going to reject that. I'm going to reject the ways of the world so that I can do God's will in my life. It's really easy to get caught up in those other kingdoms, whether it be sports, whether it be our work, whether it be our money, whether it be golf, whether it be dance, whether it be whatever it is. It's so easy for us to get caught up and say, this is my priority. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm living for. Many of you are retired and you did a good job and saved away for your retirement so that you'd be able to live comfortably. But oftentimes in retirement, we kind of say, okay, I'm done, right? I did all this stuff. I gathered all my stuff together. I've got it here in my barn, and now it's for me to enjoy. Or those of us who are still young, those of us who are still working, those of us who are still with our kids, a lot of times we might think in kind of the opposite way of like, why do I have to do all this stuff? Why do I have to provide? Why do I have to toil so much to care for my family? And we recognize that wherever we are in life, whether we're married, whether we're single, whether we're young with little babies, whether we're old and retired, whether we've got mean teenagers for kids, whatever phase in life we're at, God has got us exactly where He wants us. And He's asking us, do my will. Don't live for you. Don't live for the world. Don't live for what's going to make you happy. Don't live for what's going to make your kids happy. Live for me. Devote yourself completely to me. And so we see in the gospel passage, right, Jesus gives these examples and He brings the sheep and the goats together, but then He separates them, right, by the ones who have done His will and the ones who haven't done His will. And it's interesting when we see these examples of Christ as king, right, and all the different parables of Christ as the king, right? He took that 1 talent from the lazy, wicked servant, gave it to the one with 10, and kicked him out, right? To the guy who showed up to the wedding feast without the garment on. He said, you knew better than this. You knew what you had to do to come in. Out with you. To these guys who didn't live and do the works of mercy, He says, out with you, to the fire prepared for the devil and his demons. Not a very happy image of a king. It's an image of a strong king, of a king who desires that we don't compromise, but rather a king who desires our complete and unfettered attention, so that we can do His will in our lives. And so Jesus is giving us the roadmap, if you will. If you want to be holy, these are the things that you must do. If you want to be holy, there are certain things that you can't do. And if you want to be holy, there are some things that you can do, but be careful, because they might lead you away from the path to holiness. And so we recognize in our lives, we kind of focus on what can we do? Like, what concrete things can we do to make ourselves more conscious of the fact that we're members of this kingdom? What are things that we can do to help ourselves to be able to do God's will in our lives? Well, one, I mean, the Mass, right? I know there's some people that don't like the gold on the wall, but that's okay. There's a heightened ability for us to enter into what we're called to do here, which is prayer. Through art, through music, through through the smell of the incense, through using our senses, we're able to say, I'm somewhere different right now. I'm entering into something different. And so we elevate it. I know. Somebody was talking to you guys for a couple of weeks about clothes and things like that, and it's like, come on, I'm on a cruise ship getting emails about, it's like, of all the things we have to complain about, the fact that someone's saying dress nicely. And, you think, like, I put on this is my ordination chasuble. It only gets worn on, like, Christmas, Easter, and these high holy days. It's not to say that, if you show up and you're the best clothes that you have and they're not as good as the clothes that someone else has, that, you've done something wrong. I mean, think of, like, the widow's mite. She gave all that she had. She gave her 2 cents, right? If the best that you have are gym shorts and a T-shirt and flip-flops, then by all means, that's what you should wear because it's the best that you have, but I bet it's not. And I'm speaking to myself there because I like to wear gym shorts, T-shirts, and flip-flops. And I made a little commitment to myself. Father Michael, he challenged me. I said, you're right. I can give God better than a pair of flip-flops. It's going to mean I have to put socks on, which is probably a gift to many people that I put socks on. But to be able to think, is there something more that I can do to enter into prayer? Is there something more that I can give to God, to my King? Right? If Jesus were to be here in our midst, in our presence, standing in front of us, wouldn't we want to be like, let me give you the very best that I have. Here's all the stuff I have. And I want to see you. And I know that the stuff that I'm giving you, you don't need because you made everything and everything already belongs to you. But I want to give to you the very best that I can. And so we recognize that in being members of the kingdom, we're called to say, well, what does the king want? What does the king expect? What does the king need? What are some ways in which I can really, truly present myself to him as a pleasing offering? You know, if you were to go on a date with somebody and it's the first date, you probably wouldn't want to, have hair all messed up and have McDonald's cheeseburger grease on your shirt and things like that. You'd take a shower, you comb your hair, and put on something. Why? Because it makes a difference in what we're doing. It makes a difference in how we're presenting ourselves. I had an interesting insight that when people get buried, right, they're always dressed in their finest. They're dressed in a suit. They're dressed in a gown to be buried in the ground, so that on the day of the resurrection, they can come forth and they can present themselves to God saying, here I am, I'm giving you the best that I have to offer. Again, I don't want to harp on that, but it's important for us to think about, as members of this kingdom of Jesus Christ, what does he ask of me? He asked me to be holy. Well, what does that mean? Right? He asked me to know him, to love him, to serve him, but what does that mean? Well, what more can I do? Does God need us to serve him? No, he doesn't need us to serve him. One, he has the angels to serve him, but he doesn't even need them because he's God. He made them. But God rejoices when we attempt to serve him. God rejoices when we try to give him our very best, even if it's like that 2-year-old that made pancakes on Mother's Day and brought them to you in bed. And you're like, yeah, I'm not going to eat that as soon as she leaves. Going to throw it in the trash. But for us to look to God and say, I'm giving you the very best that I'm able to do. I'm giving you the very best that I'm capable of. I'm going to pause. I'm going to step back. I'm going to not fill my Sunday with distractions. I'm not going to use the 5 o'clock Mass to come to because it's the last Mass of the weekend. It's like, all right, great. I did all this other stuff during the weekend, and now finally I got time to go and check this box off. Similarly, I'm not going to go to 4:30 on Saturday just so that I can say, all right, good, I got it out of the way. I can have Sunday to myself. But rather for us to look and to say, how can I center my life around Christ? How can I center my life around doing his will? How can I center my life around this here, the Mass, which is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on Calvary? How can I plan around the Mass? How can I make the Mass the most important part of my week? Well, set aside that time, make sacrifices, present ourselves as best we can, come with a spirit of openness to receiving the word of the Lord, to receiving the very body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. With that openness to sometimes, might get our conscience pricked a little bit, might get poked a little bit, might be called to say, hey, you can do this better. And if we can do something better and we choose not to, why? It seems silly, right? Like, hey, Father Tim, if you stand like this instead of how you were standing with your golf club, you're going to be able to get better rotation, and you're going to get better distance on your ball, and it's not going to shoot over there to the right. I stood up and did it. Wow! It worked. No, I'm not going to do it, though. I prefer to not be able to hit the ball far and for it to always go in the woods. That's my preference, is mediocre golf. Losing golf balls all the time. But if we're given that tool or we're given that opportunity, how can I love God better? How can I love God more fully? I think perhaps the contrary of that is, well, I choose to love myself more, which in reality is not loving myself, which in reality pushes me away from God. To love myself well means to love God first. To love others well means to love God first. To strive to be holy. To make sacrifices in our holiness. To make sacrifices in our lives, rather, that we may grow in holiness. Jesus talks in the Gospels a lot about division. He says, families will be divided, mother against daughter, father against son, and so on and so on. And we think, and we're like, that's That's crazy talk, right? How could somebody want to have such a radical change in their life that it would break off contact with a family member? Well, because to really, truly, authentically live that life of discipleship, to do the will of God, sometimes it means that we can't have a certain person in our life. Sometimes it means there's a person that in our family that we can be around, but it's best if we don't say too much. And that's okay, because God isn't calling us to be friends with everybody on earth. Rather, He's calling us to make friends in heaven. He's calling us to make friends with the saints. He's calling us to make friends with Him. He had enemies, though. He had a lot of enemies. That means that there might be some that are friends with His enemies. And we have to be okay with that. It's unfortunate, right? When we have to tell a loved one or a friend, I got to keep you at arm's length. Or worse, we just have to cut off contact completely. It seems really harsh. It seems really mean. It seems really unchristian. But in reality, it's looking and saying, I'm clinging to Christ more than anything else. It might make me happy, or actually it probably won't make me happy because it'll make me miserable to be in a relationship with somebody that makes me miserable, but I'll think that I'm doing the right thing because I'm not offending that person. Well, I probably am because there's a reason we don't get along. We oftentimes think that the Christian thing to do is to just kind of look the other way or sweep it under the rug. But in reality, the Christian thing to do is to make sacrifices, is to say no, is to say, I choose to cling to Christ. I choose to cling to the cross. I choose to cling to that which will make me holy. And so this feast day of Christ the King of the universe, we recognize His sovereignty in our lives. We recognize how He is the one that is truly in control of our lives. Let us rededicate ourselves to Him as His subjects. Let us rededicate ourselves to Him as His faithful followers. Let us rededicate ourselves to Him as ones who one day will inherit what He has for us, that we will become co-heirs with Him for all of eternity.